even my friends surprised me in the back. Miss Vivian, I don't know how many of y'all have had an opportunity to read the book, but as Miss Vivian said, my name is Jamila Minnicks, and I am the author of Moonrise over New Jessup. And I want to start by talking about where New Jessup came from. Because you see, my great-great-grandmama, my great-great-granddaddy were born enslaved in Marengo County, Alabama. My great-great-granddaddy Preston was 21 and Margaret was 19 at emancipation, and they walked away from a plantation owned by a man named Dr. Reese. So you would think that they would walk away from this place and they would be Margaret and Preston Reese, but my great-great-granddaddy, my great-great-grandmama walked away as young. Like so many of the formerly enslaved, when they said, we're walking into freedom, I'm not walking into freedom with that name. So there were freedmen. Some people worked on the water, so they became watermen. My people were reborn, so they walked off as young. From Preston and Margaret, they had my great-granddaddy O'Connor, who married Betty. Betty and O'Connor then turned around and had John, who was my granddad. He married Bee. And they had 7 children, including my mama, Gloria. And from my mama and my dad came me. Moonrise over New Jessup is my tribute to my ancestors and the places that they built so that I could be here. So you'll notice, if some of you all have had a chance to read the book, that Alice's last name is Young. And Alice Young gets off the bus in 1957 in New Jessup, Alabama. And when I call Alabama, and I call 1957, and I call Alice Young as a Black woman, some people have one thing in mind when they think about what she must have gone through. But Alice Young gets off the bus, and she's a young. She's experiencing what I envision my great-great-grandparents experienced that first sunrise of emancipation. When they're walking into a place, walking into a new way of life, when they're free to be. And you have to understand, my people are Alabama, and so I grew up thinking of women in particular from Alabama as smart and determined and courageous and creative, and women who know their own mind. And in a place where you're experiencing your first sunrise into freedom, your first sunrise into emancipation, I always envision what that looked like for my great-great-grandparents and all the newly emancipated people. So I'll start tonight by reading a portion of Moonrise over New Jessup that gives you Alice's impression of what it was like to come into a new place where she is newly free to be. So if any of y'all are following along, I'm going to start where most things start at the beginning. The moon rises and sets, stitching eternity together, night by night. Love's spun thread binds family when even years of blue sky stand between one and another's touch. Generations travel the same footprints, reach hands to the same climbing branches, and warm the same brown skin under the Alabama sun. Maybe family brings to mind only blood, marital relations. It's easy to understand that way of thinking. But love by my hands tethers generations to generations, as well as kin by skin, in this place where all in me and of me can thrive. Yet even the strongest thread will snap with constant tension and no slack. The heavens overflow with memories lost. The time had come for me to leave it. The sun was setting, how far was it coming? It's announced November, just a few days coming. But 1957 was still October old when my landlord ended up face down on the ground for trying to drag me behind him to the tool shed. I was the last to leave the home house in Rensselaer. Daddy had passed a couple of weeks before, and I had settled him next to Mama, though his burial left me scrambling for the rent. My sister Rosie was rooming with a nice family in Chicago doing hair, and my need to keep a roof over my head had mellowed my worry to wonder about when her next letter would arrive. There was plenty of gleaning left to make November's payment, then I could scratch around for whatever came available to buy myself some time. I had never planned or wanted to leave Alabama, but with old man Todd shouting curses at my back, his face split open and gushing sweet gum red, my plans to stay began to fade. After a night at the neighbor's and an hour's long walk with the dawn, I arrived at the bus station with just my thrown-together knapsack. The man behind the counter assured me that my little money would carry me to Birmingham, not Nashville or Louisville or Cleveland, let alone Chicago. Birmingham, he said, and no further. In those hours I waited on the bus to depart, the world came undone piece by piece. Unable to get to a place I never wanted to go, with ticket in hand to a place I knew not a single soul, first, the landscape flattened. Direction was next, north, south, east, west, all headed towards the unfamiliar, then finally color, till everything faded to black and white. I rode the bus into this flat, directionless, colorless world, until it shushed to a stop in my new home. Not that I knew it at the time, no, my ticket read Birmingham, and all I knew was that we had stopped somewhere between nowhere in particular and the big city. We had traveled 100 country miles, and maybe 10, stopped once, twice, 4 times, I don't know. I was huddled against my window, watching the world blur by, as the man seated next to me kept up one-sided conversation about returning north after visiting with his wife and children down country. Somewhere along the way, he started worrying me about the brown paper bag on my lap and the chicken grease soaking through to my dress, but that oily stain hardly ruined anything. The gray threads had known color when I first sewed it, red plaid. But that stain just turned light gray to ash, and ash gray to black, so somewhere near Needham, I offered him the chicken. He took it and finally left me alone. We shushed to a stop and the bus emptied, some getting off, hugging loved ones below, some taking luggage from the belly of the bus, and most everybody stretching, smiling, and laughing underneath the blue sky day. But the stops were all the same to me, so I stayed inside with my head against the glass, feeling the sun's warmth on the window. And that's when a red-heeled shoe clicked its way up the sidewalk. 2 of them, if I'm honest, so it wasn't so much the shoes that caught my eye, but the bronze-stocking legs inside them. They continued up the way towards the sidewalk cafe before disappearing through the front door. My eyes traveled from the cafe to the paved sidewalk to the row of brick-front shops lining the wide avenue. The sun gleamed from the white tile at the bus depot, and a polished chrome dog leapt over the door. A couple folks, one like me, the other nothing like me, looked around unsure what we were seeing. When the man seated next to me returned smelling of cigarettes and shoe polish, he urged me off the bus with a dime from his own pocket. Miss, I'm not stopping for quite a while, and this here is a good place to stretch your legs. Why don't you go on inside and get yourself a Coca-Cola before we go off again? Before stepping foot to pavement, I hovered in the doorway of that bus. To the left and the right, the avenue, the sidewalk, the store fronts, all extended to the horizon in either direction. But reaching the front door of the depot, the colored entrance was nowhere in sight. To my right, a shoeshine man chewed a toothpick while studying the shoe and the polish in his hands from every angle. Behind me, from the bus window, the man urged me through the door, only the last thing I needed was to be arrested for going through the front just to buy a coat. You don't have to read it if you don't want to. I just suggested it, but you don't have to. I hear all the pages turning. Help you, miss? Asked the shoeshine man. Till the words eased from his mouth, he done his level best to ignore me. With the weather beaten hand-me-downs on my feet, it was no wonder why. I'm looking for the colored entrance, please, I said to the pavement, not wanting to be pegged ignorant of city ways and where they hid the Negro doorways. You won't find one of them here, he said. Just walk in. I prefer the colored entrance. Please, I insisted. He seemed an unusual man, perhaps a prankster of some sort, with the long limbs, triangular head, and bulging eyes of a chameleon. Just the sort to make trouble for folks and dart away. Ain't got one of them, 'cause ain't nothing but Negroes in this town is what I'm telling you. Look around and see if you see any white folks other than these sorry feet from the buses. He smirked and returned his attention to the shoe in his hand, satisfied he knew the lay of the land. A dark brown man sold bus tickets and answered questions inside, while two soldiers in army-issue khaki rushed past me, one with the deep mulberry skin of the ready harvest, and the other, my same sun-gold cinnamon, dark freckles on his cheeks, who placed a hand to his peaked cap. A light-skinned woman with a wild mane of bottle red hair rushed into a yellow cab driven by a portly man of pecan complexion. He sped past an ebony police officer in white gloves holding palms up, meaning stop. A deep bronze man across the street wore paint-covered bib overalls, smoking a cigarette next to another bib overall man, cocoa brown. And the family by the drink machine, well, the mama, she was hot yellow, but her husband was a rich, deep brown to make some good, peaty sauce. One child favored him, one her, one fell to a brown somewhere in the middle, and that was just within those few feet of me at the depot. Up and down the avenue, Negroes of every shade came together like the dusk in a fall forest. I should have been glad, relieved to find such a sight on my journey. But my knees gave out and I sank onto the bench next to the shoeshine man. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed. Ain't our folks' usual reaction when they first arrive in New Jessup, he said, patting my shoulder with the light taps of a man unaccustomed to comforting people. I stopped crying in time to wave the bus off, too exhausted to shed another drop. Is there a church house nearby? Pastor Mr. Brown will take right good care of you up at the Moonrise Baptist, he said, and with walking directions, he sent me on my way. But after I took a couple steps up the sidewalk, he called out. When I turned, he spoke to the stain on my dress and the marks on my arm that weariness had me forgetting to hide. But miss, if you looking for white folks, and I don't imagine that you would be, say that you are. No, you'd have to get all the way to the other side of the woods to find a single one. So, welcome to New Jessup. So, as you've seen, Alice has first discovered in her experience, what it means to be free to be. And she burst out crying. Alice has come from a place where she's lost her mom, she's lost her daddy, she's stressed after an attack from her landlord, and she's just trying to find her way to Chicago. But she's also come from this place in the Jim Crow South that was nothing like the New Jessups of the world. So there have been, between the late 18th and the early 20th century, there were 1,200 of these towns that were founded. These were what we would call bottoms, quarters, black neighborhoods, enclaves, cities, like where Zora Neale Hurston came up. These are places like where my mama used to teach us, you can see it, you can be it. You would go see a doctor and you could be that doctor. You had a black teacher and you could be a black teacher. These are places that my ancestors and elders, as many of our ancestors and elders, built with our hands, from used up, farmed out farmland, from swampland that white folks just didn't want. And so these places gave our ancestors, my ancestors, our people, an opportunity to explore what it meant to be free to be in a world that really didn't want us to be anywhere. We built these communities from the ground up. You know, a lot of times when I have this talk with folks, particularly young people, we just had the 100th anniversary of the Greenwood Massacre. And so, particularly with young Black kids, I'll say, we had these places, even Freedom, Georgia was just founded in 2019. And the first thing that these young people say to me is, yeah, we had them, but we don't have them anymore. They're all gone, they're all wiped out. And they call Greenwood as an example of what always, quote, happens to our communities. This is not to disavow white supremacist racism. White violence is as American as apple pie. But what breaks my heart when I call Greenwood and the first thing that people elevate is the violence, I ask these kids, what did they have there that you're so brokenhearted about? And they don't know. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Greenwood. Greenwood was founded in 1905. 1905. In 16 years, they built up the Black Wall Street. It had everything these folks could want. Usually these enclaves started with a church house / schoolhouse. It was a schoolhouse most days of the week, church house on Sunday. It was one building. From that, and that was because worship, fellowship, and education were the most important things to our ancestors. They built shelters because we needed a place to live, right? I mean, we needed everybody in the swamp has equal opportunity to get snake bit and get fever. We needed places to live. But from that, Greenwood in Oklahoma was flat as far as I could see. From that, our people built hotels, schools, savings and loans, candy stores. What always gets me is there were photography studios there. And I don't know, I mean, there's something about that to say that the technology of photography was so ingrained in this place when it was still a relatively new technology all around the world. We had photography studios in Greenwood, Oklahoma. So what I want to do and what I want us to try and do when we talk about these enclaves is elevate the excellence, elevate what our ancestors built with their hands. Because when we continue to tell young and old Black people that our history is only a degradation of trauma and pain, what do we think our value is? What do we know our value to be? What do we know we're free to be? We acknowledge and we fight against anti-Blackness and white racist violence, but we also have to build ourselves up and recognize and appreciate what our ancestors built. So in Moonrise over New Jessup, I sought to do that. I wanted to make sure that when we talk about these enclaves, that we're elevating first what we built. My mama used to say, you can't love me when I'm alive, don't grieve me when I'm gone. So this is Alice. Now Alice meets this young man named Raymond. And Raymond he's invited this freedom rights organization to New Jessup. Now in these all Black enclaves, they would say, why do we need a freedom organization? We got everything we need, right? So any sort of agitating not only could cause the white folks on the other side of the woods to come and want to look around and cause mischief, but it would also cause this young couple to potentially be put out of town. But Raymond meets Alice, and he just can't take his eyes off her. So he invites her out on a date. They go to this nice restaurant, and they're having this lovely meal. They're joking around, they're getting to know each other, and the connection is instant. But Alice is somebody who has come to New Jessup about 8 months before. Raymond has been there his entire life. He spent some time at Alabama State University in Montgomery. But he's now back in New Jessup. He's the grandson of the founders. He's somebody who's very proud of what they've built there. And he's trying to explain to her what New Jessup came from, where it came from. They're having a beautiful time, and all of a sudden, right in the middle of their dinner, white people's mischief comes and flops down on the third chair. So Alice says, we're not doing that tonight. So this is Alice sort of explaining how she tries to turn her around. New Jessup, just for a point of clarification, New Jessup is where the Black people live. Negro Jessup is what we used to have, and Jessup proper is where the white people live on the other side of the woods. Jessup grew till emancipation created the Negro problem. The white folks needed us, but had no desire to live by us. A problem hardly acknowledging that our proximity to white folks had never done us any favors. Raymond's smile returned when he started talking about how new freedmen gladly separated into a community called Negro Jessup. Far on the other side of the train tracks were those who had worked from field to house and everywhere inside Jessup reconstructed their lives on useless farmland given by the very people who held them in bondage. There, men and women who had made meals of pig's feet, chicken backs, corn pone, and chitlins built 2-story houses when most white folks were still living in one. Men and women scarred by the whip and the branding iron sent children to professional schools who then returned as doctors and businessmen, architects and engineers, tradesmen and teachers. Negroes opened a hospital and a savings salon and rode their horses, drove their carriages over pavement. Miss Vivian's grand-mère opened an original tailor-made dress shop where she designed dresses for the town's most fashionable ladies, and Raymond's great-great-granddaddy turned his training as a blacksmith into the town fixer's shop. Negro Jessup was modern and thriving and building ever closer to the white folks' side of town and making white folks wonder just who was living on the other side of the tracks for who. I knew this story and enjoyed watching him be proud of it at first. But Raymond started drawing figure eights on his salad plate as he began talking about the 1903 riot that left 6 dead and drove the rest of our folks into the swamp. With shotguns and deeds and the threat of torches in hand, a white mob evicted our people and absorbed Negro Jessup as their own. As Raymond began describing this evil, his face clouded and the light in his eye dimmed a touch. Since coming to town, Mr. Marvin and Miss Vivian had recounted this horror to me a number of times, and I had my own share of Rensselaer nightmares to add atop the heap. But this was our first time together, the first time he'd said this many words to me. Our first real opportunity to learn about each other in this place where we were free from sitting around rehashing the misdeeds of white folks. As he settled into the telling, he knocked some lettuce off of his plate. Too embarrassed to be sure what to do next, the pity on my face only made him lay his fork down. So when the waiter made his way towards us, just before he served the soup, I teased Raymond into ushering talk of white folks back across the woods. I really enjoy hearing you tell the story of New Jessup. Again, I said. The shock was immediate and lasting since the waiter took his time clearing the crumbs and sliding our bowls on the table. You must have been bored to death listening to me talk. That makes sense about Mr. Marvin, but Miss Vivian too, huh? I can't believe you just let me go on like that, he said as I took a spoonful of my bisque. It was delicious, and I felt slightly bad for enjoying it as much as I did, but with talk of white folks excused from the table, he seemed all right. Better than all right when he smiled and asked, "But did they tell you how we paid for it? The land?" The greens and yellows reflecting in his eyes suggested he relished his part and wanted to answer his own question. No, you tell me. Crossing this last couple inches between us, he leaned in close enough for my perfume and his aftershave to mingle and told Mr. Dale's version of the truth, his daddy. The big Papa Clifford was one of several pouring money atop money in the swamp. Coins and bills they managed to smuggle out in the overnight hours of the riot. White folks had taken everything for their own, including every Negro dime in the savings and loan, but after some days, Folks in the swamp started pouring money from socks, coin purses, and $20 gold pieces too. The Ladies' Economic Improvement Society had agreed to sew them in the backsides of baby dolls. Stop lying. His grin said he was satisfied about my surprise. Now I know you're telling the tale right on camera. Dale Campbell tells it for true, he said. Socks, mason jars, flour sacks, silk purses, doll babies, you name it. He says nickels, dimes, dollars, and even $20 gold pieces piled up like a king's ransom out there. And remember, this was a time when you could buy an acre of land for 50, 60 cents in Gilliam County. He lowered his voice and whispered right in my ear. I flashed hot. And I tell you why I believe it too. Plenty of old timers around here still do that, keep money hidden around the house, including my father. He says that if a Negro's got thousands in the bank, he better have millions of under his mattress. So the thing I love about Alice is that she fights so hard to center Black people in our own story. And in this part and throughout the book, she maintains that this is part of her ability to be free, to center us in a town for us. You know, I was very fortunate to be interviewed by Lene O'Neill from Ascape, and she said the most perfect thing about this book. She said at the heart of it, this is a book about Black people minding our own Black business. And I love that. It so perfectly captures what Alice is fighting for this whole time. You know, she's saying, that's over there, right? We live in this tenuous peace. We understand what's going on over there. We understand the world. You know, Black mamas in the world. But we understand the world, but we also have to elevate and appreciate what we have right here, what we built right here. And it was so important in that part because Raymond was veering off course, right? He's saying, I've asked you out. I've gone through all this trouble. He went through all this trouble, even got his daddy's car, y'all. Went through all this trouble, take her out to this really nice dinner. And then here we have White Mischief sitting at the table. And I think when Alice comes into New Jessup and she says, I'm free to be smart and determined and creative and to know my own mind. I'm free to be vulnerable. I'm free to have fun. I'm free to fall in love. I'm free to be me. That's where she goes when she sees things veering off course. Now, Raymond, when he actually tells her what he's up to, because she doesn't know at this point, she's unhappy. She doesn't really understand because she doesn't understand. She knows the group and the reputation of the group, but she doesn't understand what he's doing. But because Alice believes in him, I believe, I think of the Merles and the Bettys and the Corettas, these women, before they were sort of these mothers of the movement, right? When their men were assassinated and they took on these roles. I think of them as a young Alice, as 20, 21, 22 years old, meeting these men before they had an inkling of a dream. Every single one of these men acknowledged that they wouldn't be the men who they are without these women by their side. And that's from John. Raymond says it over and over in the book. I'm not who I am without you. So Alice plays a really important role in his life, but she's also constantly fighting to make sure that Black people are the center of our narrative. So Raymond gets involved with this group, and he's got some people, we call them the fellas and Patience. They're all friends from when they're in grade school. And Alice and Patience, they're the only two that are sort of around, and so Patience wants to sort of get Alice into the fray, and Alice says, no ma'am, I don't need anything. I know my mind, I'm happy, I support y'all, I'm gonna make sure that everybody eats, but I don't have any use for being a part of the planning stuff. I know what I want out of this life. I want the freedom to be in this place. But Patience is looking for, I think, an ally. And she's got some ideas. And so Alice, and she says, I need to sort of focus and center us. There's another night when she and Patience sort of have to have a conversation. So this night, some of the fellas, they're all gathered around, wives, girlfriends, boyfriends, husbands, and there's been a party, and the party's over. And so they're all sort of like the really close-knit group is just sort of sitting around talking. And Alice has sort of lamented that every time she and Patience sort of get in the same room together, the Patience is always like, what about the white folks? But what about the white folks? And Alice like, they white folks, Patience, was all I said. And we both understood that that was the end of it for me. But she liked to have a word about everything and enjoyed toe-to-toe banter with the fellas. She could hold her own with them most ways, more than I could or cared to. After all, she'd known them since the schoolyard, and then their NNAS work, and the NNAS is the Freedom Rights Organization. One summer night, Emma Jean Green held a birthday barbecue for Hugo. The evening had wound down to just the two of them, Matthew, Patience, Abel Gaston, Major, and Nina Royal, and me and Raymond sitting in the yard, talking in a circle of chairs. Standing and stretching as the lightning bugs started their show, Matthew yawned that him and Patience were leaving. Long days working at Blakely Memorial as part of his summer break had him aching for a good night's sleep. After teasing Matthew for leaving so early, Hugo welcomed him back any time to help finish off this 18-point buck. How many hunters are there here? An 18-point buck is like a unicorn. The lightning bugs even blinked, wondering how the buck had grown so large. Eyes that had watched Hugo take an 8-point buck found each other. I was on that hunt, as were Major and Raymond. Hugo's one drooped eyelid squinted almost closed, and he flashed his got-to smile. Emma Jean shook her head slowly, a renegade blonde-tinted girl falling in her face and teasing her quick rabbit nose. Laughter waited to be ignited like gunpowder. Raymond started. 18, he said. You heard me say it. I heard you say it, but you sure you meant it? Couldn't possibly, I said, unless we talking all told on the day. I'll spot you those 2 rabbits you got, but even 2 points apiece, you still way short. God sent me an 18-pointer himself now. I said, come on up to heaven, Mr. Deere. It's time for you to meet your maker. I looked Hugo right in his good eye and said, you either need to leave God out of this or sit over there and tell this lie. I pointed all the way to the other side of the yard, so we ain't all riding your lightning bolt straight to West Hill for this exaggeration. Now, Atlas, I know you ain't talking mess, Miss Blake Huntress. Not about no 18-point buck, I ain't. You are correct. But Hugo used to let up, the play fueled by raspy chuckles and tittering giggles around the circle. Finally, the Major sat back in his chair, his long arms spread wide, arms across his chest, long legs spread wide, his arms across his chest, his U.S. Army eagle straining against the muscle of his forearm. He was plain-spoken, like to exaggerate the roundness of his words. Oh, Hugo, stop all this, man. Just the other day, he was 12, and when you got him, he was practically fresh out of his mama's lady business down. Major, shrieked Minnie, but it was too late. The laughter rocked and rolled and bent us over. Minnie turned from a creamy moonshade to bright red, and black tear tracks trailed from her eyes, through her rouge dripping from her face to the grass. The laughter roared like a fire only capable of snuffing itself. Yet in the middle of it all, Patience smiled, her shoulders just bouncing slightly, familiar enough with Hugo's exaggerations, but unfamiliar enough with hunting to understand the scale of this walking. That whole time, her small grin bred more embarrassment than amusement. When only the soft snorts and head shakes of the funny memory remained, Patience said, Alice, your mama taught you to shoot, didn't she? She sure did. You think you could teach me? It's just, well, Matthew never took me hunting, and none of y'all have ever offered, she said, scanning her wounded indictment among the men. Fresh, nervous laughter murmured around like an irregular heartbeat. But when did you become interested in shooting, Sunshine? Let alone hunting, Matthew asked, confusion narrowing his already sleepy eyes. He can't even stand blood. Maybe if somebody would have offered to take me, I could have learned to appreciate hunting, she said, with a sweet smile to coat the sharpness of her accusation. So, what do you say, Alice? You'll show me? I agree. So, this again is Alice enjoying this place where she can be among her folks. She immediately and always rejects Patience's attempts to center whiteness in Black spaces. And it's really subtle, but where I came up and the people I'm around, I went to the Howard University School of Law with somebody else in this room. And we had a lot of things going on in law school. Law school's hard, it's challenging, it's intense. But while we had the challenging and the intense and the exams and late nights, we had each other. We were able to center ourselves and be amongst one another to make the hard just that much easier. The other night I had somebody ask a question about a health problem, and she said, and then on top of everything, she's living in the Jim Crow South, and all this other stuff is happening, and then you throw in health problems. And I said, yeah, exactly. That's what racism is. We don't get to separate that out. So in these spaces, you have to think about how hard she's trying every single time she's turning a conversation to say, you can't have this space. Whiteness cannot consume this space. And keep in mind, Alice moved there. It's not like Alice came up and knew Jessup. Alice knows what the Jim Crow South was absolutely capable of. And I don't know if it makes her fight harder, but I know it makes her appreciate it. Alice has very much in common with sort of the old heads who say, this is ours. We built it. The old heads who remember that swamp, remember being put out. Alice very much knows what the South is capable of. And so she's fighting throughout this entire book to protect Black spaces and to make sure that Black people are the center of our story. So I'll tell you one more thing and then I'm going to let y'all go or ask me some questions or whatever y'all want to do. But Alice, so Raymond has this younger brother, his name is Percy. And Percy, bless his heart, is about a year younger than Raymond. He's a year behind him in school. He's really strong-willed. He thinks he knows everything. But somehow or other, if Raymond does something, Percy ends up falling in line. So Raymond and Percy had gone to Montgomery together. They had served in the bus boycotts together. And Raymond came home, was immediately smitten when their mama died, was immediately smitten with Alice and decided to stay a while in New Jessup and see if they could make things right. Percy goes back to Montgomery and he's trying to get his brother to come back and fight and come back to get back involved with the fight for integration. And Raymond's like, no, man, I'm chilling. I'm getting married. I'm going to have a family. So they have some words, but Percy ends up being pretty cool to Alice. So at one point, she sort of confronts him, or he confronts her, and they have some sort of a moment where there's not seeing eye to eye. But then Percy and his wife get pregnant, and Percy decides that he wants to raise his child in New Jessup. So Dot, who pretty much runs everybody, she says, we're not moving back here unless you can make peace with Alice. I'm not giving anything away, I promise you. So I'll read this last part. So with Percy behind Blue Lightning's wheel, Blue Lightning is her car, the two of us drove to the supermarket for ginger ale, canned pineapple, and some other things we needed on Christmas Eve. Along the way, he ground the gears and complained that they had yet to fix my car properly, although an entire year had passed. But other than wishing that they had listened to him while the water pump the ride was jerky and quiet. When we arrived at the ginger ale, he picked up the Schweppes and I grabbed the store brand. That's high today, I said, and I have a coupon for this other one. This is the one she keeps at the house. I put mine back and He placed his in the buggy. Then he watched me put the 7-Up in the cart with a slight questioning frown. She likes this one, he said about the shrubs again. Ginger ales for her, 7-Ups for the cake. He nodded and we moved on in silence. It felt like somebody needed to fill it as we next wound our way down the baking aisle. I'm glad to hear we'll be neighbors, I told him. He nodded and scanned some prices for instant pudding. Your brother, Pop, they're over the moon. Your father told me him and Miss Catherine always thought their closest grandbabies would be in Montgomery. Yeah, they used to say that all the time. Guilt Regina and Edwards or Trevor and Emma Jean to move back or at least come home more often. He picked up a can of milk, bounced it in his hand, and placed it back, label front on the shelf. I'm glad too. Yeah, I know you and Daughter close. She's happy, I'm happy. Safely around another corner, he walked next to me with eyes now averting the Kotex. And I know you and your brother are close, and I'm glad you'll be working with him again. I know he misses that. And I'm thinking that since y'all are close, and me and Dot are close, and him and her are close, and me and Raymond are close, and me and Pop are close, and you and Pop are close. Mm-hmm. He raised an eyebrow. Then maybe you and me can try being real friends. I know Dot wanted us to talk, and Raymond told me you heard what I said last year on the porch. Both those things can be true, Percy, and I can still mean what I say. I ain't got no quarrel with you. Never did, if I'm honest. Because I know what it is to miss your mama, your candy at Christmas time. But there's enough people in the world telling us we ain't worth nothing for failing to be breaking apart over some stupid words. Think so? I know so. I come from people too, remember? Everybody says things we wish you could take back. But there comes a time to let it go, I said to him, praying to Rosie. While he thought on my words in the aisles, checking products, asking about this and that with mild enthusiasm, I could tell he was using the silences to work something out of his head, like Dot said. So no real thawing occurred until we finished our shopping. He put the packages in the trunk, and he got back behind the wheel. And Jessup has grown up so much since I was a little boy. Being away and then coming back home, I can see that now. You know, when you're growing up right alongside a city, you don't always see it. But I remember when there was nothing super about this market. It was too small to serve the community back then, and now look. We have a Custer's General Store on one end of town and Brooks Supermarket on the other, all owned and run by Negroes. As a boy, I couldn't understand what a big deal Negro ownership was because I didn't know any different. I knew Fitzhugh owned his place and we owned our shop, and I didn't see any difference between Pop and him. Don't get me wrong, I knew they were white folks and they lived on the other side of the woods, not to be trifled with. But they weren't here either. We were. This was ours. I still wake up sometimes thinking that shoeshine man at the Greyhound station is playing tricks, I told him. Shoeshine man? He smiled his confusion. Story for another day. Well, Dot's wanted to come home since we finished at state. I refused outright, told her that New Jessup was full of backward-thinking Booker T Negroes who couldn't see the swamp for the trees. And you should have heard the conversations I had with Raymond about coming back. I heard one, remember? He winced and blushed at my little joke. I am sorry. I never meant for you to hear that. Go ahead, Percy. What were you saying about coming home? Well, when you asked me where I sit on the bus and why, did you ever yank my chain? I was so mad I had to get up and walk away from you, girl. Talked Dot's ear off about it that night till she threatened to put me on the couch in my own mama's house. But you challenging me about integration? Some woman popping out my mama's house wearing her apron? How dare you? He threw a wry smile at me that hinted almost as handsome as Raymond. But you were right. I was killing my spirit to make a point. This is a fight about resources, so let it be about resources alone, and let's quit fussing about the things we don't want, which for me was that seat on the bus. I stopped all that worrying, all that wondering that those kill you quick thoughts, the kind that fester and eat you up inside. Does this woman next to me despise me, or will she tolerate me? Does this man maybe even respect me? And if he does respect me, what happens when somebody who doesn't respect me gets on this bus and sees us sitting together, maybe talking? What if the one who can't stand the sight of me has a friend who decides they don't mind me, but the friend also wouldn't mind seeing me get my head bashed against the window? And if it was a white woman sitting next to me, what if I bump her purse, or worse, her arm, or worse, her leg? It ain't always the consequences that'll kill you quick, but the imaginings of the consequences eating you up inside. Yeah, all that black down, all that wondering just worrying the life, the spirit right out of you. What do you know about black down? My daddy was in a mine accident as a boy. He just died a couple years back. That's why I came here. He nodded his condolences with his eyes on the road. And when he got sick, near the end there, he swore the black damp finally caught up with him. Couldn't stop coughing, could hardly ever catch his breath. It was awful to watch him suffer like that. The view outside the window was blurred by his speed and by the tears filling my eyes. But he said the coughing, he'd been expecting something like that. To lose his breath one day. But he'd felt that black damp in his head his entire life. He wasn't scared of dying, he told me. He said he wished he hadn't spent every day of his life thinking about dying, scared to trust the air. Damn, I am so sorry, Alice, he said, with enough force behind his words to release the last of the dam blocking his heart from me. He patted my knee, and I let the tears clouding my eyes finally fall down my cheeks.
So that was excellent. We have 10 minutes for Q&A. After Q&A, she'll be signing books back in the back. So any questions?
Don't be shy. I'll keep talking. No, please ask questions.
You talked about Black Wall Street. Can you tell us what happened to that?
So Black Wall Street did suffer. There was a white racial riot in 1921. Black Wall Street has since rebuilt, or did rebuild after the riot. There's currently a lawsuit going on, which I think there are, at last count, 3 survivors of the riot. I think the oldest is 107. And they are fighting not for themselves, to give you some sense of the power of our elders. They're fighting not for themselves. They're fighting to get reparations, to put that money back into the community. Because you have to think that they lived this long to make sure that the ones that came after them can benefit from their fight.
It's been said that Oklahoma is not really like the musical.
I'm sorry?
That happened in Oklahoma, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
So Oklahoma is really not as nice and pretty as the musical is.
Oh. But I do give credit to our elders who built, our ancestors who built, and our elders who continue to fight to make sure that the history is continued to be known. And, I feel very much connected to the folks there, the folks in Austin City, Alabama, which is Alabama, so my people are Southern, both partial, but I'm very grateful to all of them for keeping the history alive so that we can be here and continue to tell these stories.
So how long did it take you to write the book, and what type of research did you do?
So the first draft I wrote in 2 months.
Oh.
That's the first draft. First drafts are always ugly. Then the second draft I turned in for the Bellwether Prize about a month later. And a lot of this is, like Alice, is just based on the women in my family, but it's also, you grow up hearing stories about our side of town and what we had. And, my Auntie Jay, if she's listening, I have to give her credit. She always says, you better keep telling people that Alabama is much more than the Civil War and civil rights. And so it's getting out, talking to my folks, it's getting out, and it's doing a lot of research, like a lot of academic research on Black towns and settlements in particular. It's meeting people. So it's, it just ran the gamut of everything that goes into that.
How long have you been writing?
How long have I been writing?
Yes.
I would say 2018 is when I really started getting serious about it. I practiced law, and that's sort of the anti-creative writing. So I don't know if I should count that. But since about 2018.
Given that this is just such a unfortunately unconventional story from our people, like where and what drove you so heavily to want to just like make this a story for the masses? I mean, besides it not being.
You know, that's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked it, because I wrote this story in that 2 months because it was really on my heart. My people are Alabama, so when I grew up hearing about Alabama, there was a version in the history books that was all trauma, degradation, and pain. And I do believe that there's this thing called illusory truth, or if you keep telling people a lie often enough, they'll believe it, right? Well, I don't care who tells it, right? So it's not necessarily a lie that these things happen, because obviously these traumatic, my imagination cannot begin to fathom the horrific things that happen to our ancestors, right? But when you tell people that's the entirety of their history, then you start to believe it. And it gets to me to get to like the baby doll test from Brown versus the Board of Education, which is the good doll, which is the bad doll, which is the ugly doll, which is the pretty doll, which is the smart doll, which is the dumb doll, right? When you perpetually tell people that that's the entirety of their history, then we start to take that in. And so I knew, I feel like the elders have been saying, you have to know the entirety of your story, know how we came up. Yes, there was anti-Black violence. There's no place north, south, east, and west. Hey, listen, there's no place north or south of the Mason-Dixon and east and west of the Mississippi that has not been touched by it. Well, what we also have is communities that our ancestors and our elders really built. And so it was important for me to make sure that our community, that Black people, see this in ourselves. I wrote this book, and I don't know if you can tell or not, but I wrote this book for Black people. I welcome everybody to read it. But I wrote it for us to see ourselves. I welcome everybody inside. But this is Alice from cover to cover. This is my folks from cover to cover. My Claire, she's listening, she always says, "You sure Alice Young ain't kin to us?" And I'm like, she is you, a little bit. But I wrote this for us so that we could see a different side of ourselves. Anybody else? Come on.
What did the process look like for you tracing your ancestry? Was it well documented throughout your family, or did it require you to do more extensive research?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I think there's family history and family lore, right? Like me and my cousins can all sit down, know the same story, and none of us have it right. So that to me is like family lore. So we all know that something happened, and none of us can agree on exactly how it happened. We all have, I hope, my Aunt Anne was really great about documenting things, and also my Uncle Harold was really great about documenting things. So before they passed away, they did have a certain sort of cache of information that was available to us, which is how I know about Preston and Margaret, right? Because how else would I know? Alabama, to its credit and its shame, has a lot of records, property records. And so you can trace back through things like that. And, different states will have different ways of tracing our ancestry. And of course, I hit the same roadblocks as everybody else. There's somebody from New York. So how many of y'all remember that there was slavery in New York? Yeah. So we're not going to pin everything on Alabama. But somewhere along the line, somebody in the period when slavery was being sunsetted out of New York, one of my ancestors, instead of being emancipated, was sold. So I do know that, but I don't know where exactly she was from in New York, and so you hit the same roadblocks. But depending on the state where you're looking, they may at least have ways to get you started. And there's also a book by a woman named Francine Taylor, if you're looking at Alabama, and it specifically helps you to trace African American genealogy.
We have time for one more question.
Oh,
I
no.
want to thank you for giving this perspective because Alabama was a state that I never had an interest in visiting.
Well, now you have to listen. My auntie will be very happy to hear that. Is there,
Do you plan to write another book?
I think I'm gonna let Allison them stretch their legs a little bit. That book's been out for like 4 weeks. So, but I will definitely keep writing, and I have some short stories on, so I'm welcome to check those out too.
Thank you so much. So please line up here and take a